The moving truck disappeared around the corner of Maple Street, just as the first message appeared on 17-year-old Emma Chen's bedroom mirror. She stood frozen in the doorway, cardboard boxes scattered around her feet, staring at the words that seemed to materialize from the steam of her hot shower. "Welcome home, Emma." The old Victorian house creaked and settled around her, its 100-year-old bones adjusting to new occupants. Her parents' voices drifted up from the kitchen below, discussing paint colors and furniture placement, with the casual optimism of adults who believed fresh starts could be purchased with mortgage payments. But Emma felt something else entirely, a watchful presence that made the hair on her arms stand on end. She wiped the mirror with her towel, watching the letters smear and fade. Condensation, she told herself. Just condensation forming random patterns that her anxious mind interpreted as words. Moving to a new state was stressful enough without her imagination conjuring supernatural welcomes. Yet as she stared at her reflection in the now clear glass, she couldn't shake the feeling that someone had been trying to communicate with her. Before we dive deeper into this story, I'd like to invite you to subscribe to the channel. That way you'll always stay updated with our upcoming videos and continue discovering more fascinating stories. Now, let's begin. The rest of that first day passed in a blur of unpacking and organizing. Emma's mother, Dr. Sarah Chen, had accepted a position at the local hospital, while her father, Michael, would be starting his new job at the community college in 2 weeks. They'd moved from their cramped apartment in Chicago to this sprawling house in the small town of Millbrook, Vermont, drawn by the promise of lower cost of living and a quieter pace of life. "It has character," her mother had said during their house hunting trip, running her hand along the ornate banister that curved up to the second floor. "Look at these beautiful hardwood floors and the original crown molding. They don't build them like this anymore." Emma had noticed other things during that initial visit, the way certain rooms felt inexplicably cold, how shadows seemed to linger in corners even when lights were on, and the peculiar sensation that she was being observed. But she'd attributed these feelings to the natural unease of exploring an unfamiliar space, and her parents' enthusiasm had been infectious enough to override her reservations. Now, as evening settled over Maple Street, Emma sat cross-legged on her bedroom floor, assembling her desk while autumn rain drummed against the windows. The previous owners had left behind an antique mirror on the dresser and heavy curtains that blocked most of the natural light, giving the room a perpetually dim, cocoon-like atmosphere. She'd asked her parents if she could redecorate, but they'd suggested she live with it for a while first, to see if it grew on her. At 9:30, just as she was tightening the last screw on her desk, her phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "Did you like our welcome message?" Emma's hands stilled on the screwdriver. She picked up her phone, heart beginning to race. The number wasn't in her contacts, and the area code was local, a 802 Vermont prefix. She scrolled up through her message history, but this was the first text from this particular number. She typed back, "Who is this?" The response came immediately. "A friend. We've been waiting for you." Emma's mouth went dry. This had to be someone from school, she reasoned. Maybe word had gotten around that a new family was moving into the old Victorian on Maple Street. Small towns were notorious for their gossip networks, and teenagers were particularly skilled at obtaining phone numbers and playing pranks on newcomers. "How did you get my number?" she texted. "We have our ways." "Don't be scared, Emma. We just want to talk." The use of her name sent a chill down her spine. She stood up abruptly, walking to her window and peering out through the rain-streaked glass. The street appeared empty, illuminated only by the warm glow of porch lights and the occasional passing car. Across the street, an elderly woman was closing her curtains for the night, and 2 houses down, she could see a family gathered around their television. Everything looked perfectly normal, perfectly safe. So why did she feel like she was being watched? Her phone buzzed again. Look in the mirror. With trembling hands, Emma turned toward the antique mirror on her dresser. At first, she saw only her own reflection. Shoulder-length black hair slightly mussed from unpacking, dark eyes wide with apprehension, oversized sweater hanging loosely on her small frame. Then as she watched, new words began to appear in the condensation that shouldn't have been there, since she hadn't showered in hours. We're not from your world. Emma stumbled backward, nearly tripping over a box of books. Her rational mind scrambled for explanations. Hidden cameras, elaborate pranks, some kind of projection technology. But deep down, in a place that predated logic and science, she knew she was witnessing something that couldn't be easily explained away. The mirror fogged completely now, and more words emerged. Don't tell your parents, they won't understand. Meet us tomorrow at midnight in the basement. No, Emma whispered to the empty room. This isn't real. This isn't happening. But even as she spoke the words aloud, she was already walking toward the mirror, drawn by a mixture of terror and fascination. She reached out with one finger and touched the glass. It was cold, far colder than it should have been, and the condensation felt thick, almost oily under her fingertip. As she pulled her hand back, the fog began to clear, revealing one final message. You're special, Emma. You're the first person who's been able to see us in 50 years. The mirror cleared completely, showing only her pale, frightened face. But the words remained burned into her memory, along with the impossible coldness of the glass and the certainty that her life in Millbrook was going to be far from the peaceful, fresh start her parents had envisioned. Emma barely slept that night. Every creak of the old house, every whisper of wind against the windows, made her heart race. She'd tried to convince herself that someone was playing an elaborate prank, but the messages on the mirror defied any logical explanation she could construct. The condensation had appeared without heat or moisture, formed perfect letters without any visible means of creation, and felt unnaturally cold to the touch. By morning, she'd almost managed to persuade herself it had all been a stress-induced hallucination brought on by the anxiety of moving. That fragile rationalization lasted until she walked into the kitchen and found a new message waiting on the frost-covered window above the sink. Good morning, Emma. Sleep well? Her mother looked up from her coffee and newspaper, following Emma's horrified gaze to the window. Oh, that's odd, Dr. Chen said, walking over to examine the frost patterns. It's not nearly cold enough for ice crystals to form like this. Must be something to do with the old windows and poor insulation. Emma watched her mother trace the letters with her finger, but Sarah showed no recognition that they formed words. To her, they were simply random patterns of frost. Beautiful, perhaps, but meaningless. Emma realized with a growing sense of isolation that she truly was the only one who could see the messages. Mum, she said carefully, does the name of this house or this street mean anything? Any local history I should know about? Sarah settled back at the kitchen table, tucking a strand of graying hair behind her ear. Well, the realtor mentioned that the house was built in 1924 by a wealthy businessman named Theodore Whitmore. Apparently he lived here with his family for about 30 years before selling it. Since then, it's changed hands quite a few times. We're the 8th family to own it, I believe. Why so many owners? That seems like a lot for a house that's not even 100 years old. Her mother shrugged. Old houses can be expensive to maintain. Maybe people got tired of the upkeep, or their circumstances changed. The realtor did mention that it had been on the market for almost 2 years before we bought it, which is why we got such a good deal. 2 years. Emma filed that information away, wondering what had happened to the previous owners and why they'd left so abruptly that their belongings, like the mirror in her room, had been left behind. After breakfast, Emma decided to walk around the neighborhood, both to familiarize herself with her new surroundings and to clear her head. Millbrook was the kind of place that belonged on postcards, tree-lined streets with sidewalks cracked by decades of frost and root systems, well-maintained lawns bordered by white picket fences, and houses that represented nearly every architectural style of the past century. 3 blocks from her new home, she discovered the Millbrook Historical Society, housed in a converted church building with Gothic windows and a small sign advertising their archives and research services. On impulse, she pushed open the heavy wooden door and stepped inside. The interior smelled of old paper and lemon oil, with tall bookshelves lining the walls and display cases filled with antique photographs and artifacts. Behind a curved reception desk sat a woman in her 70s with silver hair pulled into a neat bun and wire-rimmed glasses perched on her nose. "Can I help you, dear?" the woman asked, looking up from a ledger she'd been writing in. "I'm Emma Chen. My family just moved into the old Victorian on Maple Street, and I was wondering if you had any information about the history of the house." The woman's expression shifted subtly, and Emma caught a flicker of something. Concern, perhaps, or recognition. "Ah, the Whitmore house. Yes, we certainly have records about that property. I'm Margaret Walsh, by the way. I've been the curator here for nearly 40 years. Margaret stood and walked to a filing cabinet, her movements careful and deliberate. "Your family is brave to take on that house. It's a beautiful property, but it has quite a history." "What kind of history?" Margaret pulled out a thick folder and spread several documents and photographs across a nearby table. "Theodore Whitmore built that house for his wife Eleanor and their 3 children. By all accounts, they were a happy family. Theodore owned the lumber mill that employed half the town, and Eleanor was active in local charities. The children, 2 boys and a girl, were well regarded in the community." She pointed to a black and white photograph showing a family of 5 posed in front of Emma's new home. The house looked almost identical to its current state, though the landscaping was more formal, and there was an ornate gazebo in the backyard that no longer existed. "What happened to them?" Margaret's finger moved to another photograph, this one showing only 4 family members. In the winter of 1953, the youngest child, a daughter named Lily, fell through the ice on Miller's Pond while skating with friends. She was only 15. The family was devastated naturally. Eleanor never quite recovered from the loss. Emma studied the photograph of Lily Whitmore, a pretty girl with dark hair and a bright smile, wearing a white dress with lace trim. Something about her seemed familiar, though Emma couldn't place why. The family left Millbrook about a year after Lily's death. Theodore sold the mill and the house, and they moved west to start over. But according to local stories, they never really got over their grief. Eleanor claimed she could still hear Lily's voice calling to her, especially in the house. Some people said she was going mad with grief, but others— Margaret paused, choosing her words carefully. Others believed that Lily's spirit remained in the house where she'd been happiest. Emma felt a chill that had nothing to do with the October weather. What happened after the Whitmores left? The house has had a troubled history since then. 7 different families have owned it, and none have stayed for more than a few years. There have been reports of strange occurrences, doors opening and closing on their own, cold spots that can't be explained, and messages appearing in frost and condensation. Most people dismiss these things as old house quirks, but there's been enough consistency in the reports that some of us wonder. Margaret trailed off, but Emma pressed her. "Wonder what?" The older woman looked at her intently. "Whether Lily Whitmore is still trying to communicate with the living. The reports always mention a young girl's presence, and they always involve families with teenage children. It's as if she's looking for someone who can understand her, someone close to her own age when she passed away. Emma's hands were shaking now. She stared at the photograph of Lily, at those bright, intelligent eyes and that confident smile, and felt a profound sense of recognition. This was who had been trying to communicate with her. This was the source of the messages, and the impossible cold and the watchful feeling that had followed her since she'd arrived. "Mrs. Walsh," Emma said quietly, "what if someone could communicate with her? What if Lily was still here, still trying to talk to people?" Margaret studied Emma's face carefully. "Then I would tell that person to be very, very careful. The boundary between the living and the dead exists for good reasons, and crossing it, even with the best intentions, can be dangerous for everyone involved." Emma spent the rest of Sunday in a state of nervous anticipation, her mind cycling between rational skepticism and growing acceptance of the impossible. Every time she passed a reflective surface in the house, she found herself looking for new messages, but the mirrors and windows remained stubbornly normal throughout the day. Her parents, busy with their own settling-in tasks, didn't notice her distraction. Her father spent most of the afternoon assembling furniture and hanging pictures, while her mother organized the kitchen and made lists of household items they still needed to purchase. They chatted about their new beginning with the optimism of people who believed the hardest part was behind them. But Emma knew the hardest part was yet to come. As the day wore on and midnight approached, she couldn't stop thinking about the invitation, or was it a command, to meet in the basement. She'd explored the lower level briefly during their initial house tour and remembered it as a partially finished space with concrete walls, exposed beams, and the musty smell of old wood and dampness. At 11:30, she lay in her bed, fully clothed, listening to the sounds of her parents preparing for sleep. Her father's snoring typically began within minutes of his head hitting the pillow, and her mother was a deep sleeper who rarely woke during the night. By 11:50, the house had settled into silence except for its usual complement of creaks and sighs. Emma slipped out of bed, grabbed her phone's flashlight, and crept downstairs. The basement door was located off the kitchen, and it opened with only the softest squeal of hinges. The wooden steps were steep and narrow, and she descended carefully, one hand on the rough banister and the other holding her phone. The basement was larger than she remembered, extending beneath most of the house's footprint. The ceiling was low enough that a tall person would have to duck in places, and several support pillars divided the space into distinct areas. Along one wall stood an old furnace that looked like it belonged in a horror movie, all cast iron and exposed pipes. Against another wall, someone had built crude wooden shelves that now held an assortment of forgotten items: paint cans, gardening tools, and boxes labeled in fading handwriting. Emma stood in the center of the space, her flashlight beam dancing across the shadows, and waited. The silence was profound, broken only by the distant hum of the water heater and the settling sounds of the house above. She checked her phone. 12:01 a.m. "I'm here," she whispered to the darkness. "Are you?" At first nothing happened. Then gradually the temperature in the basement began to drop. Emma could see her breath forming small clouds in the increasingly frigid air. The cold seemed to concentrate in one corner of the basement, near a set of built-in shelves that held old Christmas decorations and boxes of forgotten belongings. Her phone's flashlight began to flicker, the beam growing weaker despite showing a full battery. In the wavering light, Emma saw condensation forming on the concrete wall, beading into droplets that began to trace letters. "Thank you for coming." Emma's voice caught in her throat, but she managed to respond. Are you Lily?" The condensation shifted, forming new words. "Yes. I've been waiting so long for someone who could see me." Despite her fear, Emma felt a wave of compassion. She thought about the photograph she'd seen at the Historical Society. The bright, confident girl who died far too young, whose family had been destroyed by grief. "How long have you been here?" "Time doesn't work the same way for me now. Sometimes it feels like yesterday that I fell through the ice. Sometimes it feels like forever. But I know it's been many years, because I've watched families come and go. You're the first person who's been able to see my messages clearly." Emma moved closer to the wall, her fear beginning to give way to curiosity and sympathy. "What do you want? Why are you still here?" The words appeared more quickly now, as if Lily was gaining strength or confidence. "I never got to say goodbye. When I fell through the ice, it happened so fast. One moment I was laughing with my friends, and the next I was under the water, so cold and dark. I tried to find my way back to the surface, but I couldn't. I tried to call for help, but no one could hear me." Emma felt tears pricking her eyes. "I'm so sorry, that must have been terrifying." It was, but what came after was worse. I found myself back in this house, but no one could see me or hear me. I watched my parents cry. I watched my mother grow thin and pale, calling my name in empty rooms. I tried so hard to let them know I was still here, but they couldn't understand. Eventually they left, and I've been alone ever since." The condensation paused, and Emma waited, giving Lily time to continue. When the words resumed, they carried a desperate urgency. "I need to tell them I'm okay. I need them to know that I didn't suffer, that I'm not lost or afraid anymore. But they're all gone now, aren't they? My parents, my brothers, they must all be dead by now." Emma's heart broke for this lonely spirit, trapped by unfinished business and unspoken words. "Lily, it's been over 70 years since you died. Yes, your family would have passed away by now, but maybe there are other ways to find peace. Maybe there are other people who need to hear from you." "What do you mean?" Emma thought carefully before responding. "You said, I'm the first person who could see your messages clearly. Maybe that means I'm supposed to help you. Maybe we're supposed to help each other." The temperature in the basement rose slightly, and Emma sensed a shift in the atmosphere. Less desperate, more hopeful. "You would do that, help me?" "I don't know how yet, but yes, I think I would." "There are others here too, Emma. Other spirits who've been trapped like me. Some of them have been here much longer. Some of them are angry. They've tried to communicate with the living, but when people can't see or hear them, they become frustrated, sometimes violent." Emma felt a new chill, this one born of fear rather than supernatural cold. "What do you mean, violent?" "They make the houses cold, slam doors, break things. They're not evil, just desperate to be acknowledged. But you're different. You can see us, talk to us. You could help all of us find peace." The condensation on the wall began to fade, and Emma sensed that their conversation was coming to an end. "Lily, wait. How do I know this is real? How do I know I'm not just having some kind of breakdown from the stress of moving?" The final message appeared clearly, unmistakably. "Tomorrow, look in the local newspaper archives for January 15th, 1954. You'll find the article about my death. The headline will read, 'Local Girl Drowns in Skating Accident.' My full name was Lily Catherine Whitmore, and I was wearing a red wool coat when I fell through the ice." No one living knows that detail. It was too painful for my family to discuss publicly. If you find that information, you'll know this is real." The basement returned to its normal temperature, and Emma's phone flashlight resumed its full brightness. She stood alone in the silence, processing what had just occurred. Part of her wondered if she was experiencing some form of elaborate self-deception, but the specific details Lily had provided, details that could be verified, suggested otherwise. As she climbed the stairs back to the kitchen, Emma realized that her life had just changed irrevocably. Whether she was communicating with actual spirits or experiencing something else entirely, she was now committed to finding answers. Tomorrow, she would visit the newspaper archives and search for proof of Lily Catherine Whitmore's existence and death. But tonight, she would try to sleep, knowing that she was no longer alone in the old Victorian house on Maple Street. Emma arrived at the Millbrook Public Library at 9 o'clock sharp the next morning, having barely slept, and consumed 3 cups of coffee to combat her exhaustion. The librarian, a middle-aged man with a kind smile and wire-rimmed glasses, directed her to the local history section, where bound volumes of the Millbrook Gazette dating back to the 1920s were stored. Her hands trembled slightly as she pulled the volume containing January 1954 from the shelf. The old newspapers were yellowed and brittle, their pages crackling softly as she turned them. She found January 15th and scanned the front page, her heart hammering in her chest. There it was, exactly as Lily had described. Local girl drowns in skating accident. The article detailed how 15-year-old Lily Catherine Whitmore had fallen through thin ice on Miller's Pond while skating with friends on a Saturday afternoon. The piece mentioned that she was the daughter of prominent businessman Theodore Whitmore, and that rescue efforts had continued for several hours before her body was recovered. But it was the photograph accompanying the article that made Emma gasp aloud. It showed rescue workers pulling a small figure from the pond, and while the image was grainy and indistinct, Emma could clearly make out the red wool coat that Lily had mentioned, the detail that supposedly no living person knew. "Finding what you're looking for?" Emma spun around to find Margaret Walsh standing behind her, carrying an armload of books to be reshelved. The older woman's expression was knowing, almost expectant. "Mrs. Walsh, I found the article about Lily Whitmore." Margaret set her books on a nearby table and moved closer, lowering her voice. "And did you find the detail you were looking for? The one that convinced you this was real?" Emma stared at her in shock. "How did you know I was looking for verification of something specific?" Margaret pulled out a chair and sat down beside Emma. "Dear, I've been the Historical Society curator for 40 years. I've had 7 different families approach me with questions about that house, all of them eventually admitting to strange experiences. You're the first one who's come back looking for specific historical details that weren't in our general files." "You believe in ghosts?" "I believe in things that can't be easily explained," Margaret said carefully, "and I believe that some people are more sensitive to these phenomena than others. The question is, what are you going to do with this gift?" Emma closed the newspaper volume, her mind racing. "Lily says there are other spirits in the house, other people who've been trapped and can't find peace. She wants me to help them." "That's a significant responsibility, Emma. And potentially a dangerous one. Communicating with spirits can be unpredictable. Some are benevolent, like Lily seems to be, but others can be confused, angry, or even malevolent. But if I don't help them, who will? You said I'm the first person in 50 years who's been able to see their messages clearly." Margaret studied Emma's face intently. "If you're determined to pursue this, you shouldn't do it alone. There are people in this community who understand these matters, who might be able to guide you safely." "What do you mean?" "There's a group that meets monthly at the Unitarian Church, people who've had experiences with the paranormal, along with some who study these phenomena scientifically. They call themselves the Millbrook Psychical Research Society. It's not some New Age nonsense," she added quickly, seeing Emma's skeptical expression. "These are serious people. Retired professors, a few medical professionals, a physicist from the nearby university. They approach these matters with both open minds and scientific rigor." Emma felt a surge of relief. She'd been dreading the prospect of facing this alone, keeping such an enormous secret from her parents, while trying to help multiple trapped spirits. "Would they be willing to help me?" I think so. Their next meeting is Wednesday evening. I could introduce you to their leader, Dr. Elizabeth Hartley. She's a retired psychology professor who's made a study of mediumistic phenomena for over 30 years. That afternoon, Emma returned home to find her mother unpacking boxes in the living room while her father assembled a bookshelf. The normal domesticity of the scene felt surreal after her morning revelations, but she tried to act naturally as she helped organize books and family photographs. Around 4 o'clock, as autumn light slanted through the windows, Emma noticed the temperature in the living room begin to drop. She glanced around nervously, wondering if her parents would notice, but they seemed oblivious to the change. Then she saw it. Condensation forming on the glass coffee table, spelling out a message meant only for her eyes. "Did you find the proof?" Emma nodded subtly, and the words changed. "Thank you for believing in me. The others are excited to meet you. Tonight, if you're willing." Emma's mother looked up from a box of books. "Emma, are you feeling all right? You look pale." "Just tired from the move, I think. I might go to bed early tonight." "Good idea. This has been a big adjustment for all of us." As her parents continued their work, Emma watched more words appear on the coffee table. "Bring something to write with. Some of the others find it easier than condensation messages. Midnight again, in the basement." The words faded, just as her father walked past the table, completely unaware of the supernatural communication that had just occurred inches from his feet. That evening, Emma lay in her bed fully clothed once again, a notebook and several pens tucked under her pillow. She'd also brought her phone charger, having noticed that electronic devices seemed to drain quickly in the presence of spirits. At 11:45, she crept downstairs to the basement, her heart racing with anticipation and fear. The basement was warmer than it had been the night before, though still noticeably cooler than the rest of the house. As Emma descended the stairs, she heard something that made her freeze, the soft sound of children's laughter, faint but unmistakable. "Lily?" she called softly. The condensation on the wall began to form immediately. "I'm here, Emma. And I brought friends." As Emma watched in amazement, multiple patches of condensation appeared on different walls around the basement. Messages began forming simultaneously in different locations, as if several people were trying to communicate at once. On the wall to her left, "Hello, Emma, I'm Thomas. I died in this house in 1967. On the support pillar in front of her, "Sarah here. Passed in 1983. Thank you for coming." On the ceiling above her head, words formed in frost that shouldn't have existed. "Michael, 1991. We've been waiting." Emma opened her notebook with shaking hands and began to write down the names and dates. As she did, she realized she was no longer communicating with just one lonely spirit, but with an entire community of the dead who had been trapped in this house for decades, waiting for someone who could bridge the gap between their world and hers. The real work was about to begin. Emma quickly discovered that managing communication with multiple spirits simultaneously was like trying to conduct an orchestra where every musician was playing a different song. Messages appeared on every reflective surface in the basement, walls, metal pipes, even the screen of her phone, creating a cacophony of condensation and frost that threatened to overwhelm her. "Wait," she called out, holding up her hands. "Please, one at a time. I want to hear all of your stories, but I need to be able to understand them." The messages stopped appearing, and after a moment, Lily's familiar writing formed on the main wall. "I'll help coordinate." They're just so excited to finally have someone who can see them. Emma settled cross-legged on the concrete floor, notebook open in her lap. "Okay, Lily, can you introduce them to me one by one? Thomas first. He's been here the longest after me." On the wall to Emma's left, careful letters began to form. Thomas Brennan, aged 19. Died November 3rd, 1967. I was a college student renting a room on the 3rd floor. Emma looked up, confused. There's no 3rd floor in this house. There was then. It was converted to an attic after what happened to me. I fell down the main staircase late one night, broke my neck. Everyone assumed I'd been drinking, but I hadn't. Something pushed me. A chill ran down Emma's spine. Something pushed you? What do you mean? The temperature in the basement dropped noticeably, and Lily's writing appeared urgently on the main wall. Not all the spirits here are like us, Emma. Some have been here much longer, since before the house was built. They don't like the living, and they don't like us talking to you. As if summoned by her words, Emma heard a low groaning sound that seemed to come from within the house's walls themselves. The lights flickered, something that shouldn't have been possible since she was using her phone's flashlight. Then, on the ceiling above her head, words began to form in what looked like frost, but the letters were jagged and angry. "Get out!" Emma scrambled to her feet, but Lily's voice, actually audible now, a whisper in the cold air, stopped her from running. "Don't let them scare you away. They've kept us trapped here for decades with their anger and violence. You're our first hope of freedom." "I don't understand. If you're all spirits, why do some of you seem dangerous and others seem normal?" Thomas's writing appeared again. Death affects people differently. Those who die peacefully or with unfinished business but no malice, we remain ourselves mostly. But those who die with rage, violence, or deep hatred, they become something else. They feed on fear and anger, growing stronger and more twisted over time. Another voice joined the conversation, this one appearing in condensation on a nearby pipe. "I'm Sarah Mitchell. Died in 1983 of a heart attack in the kitchen. I felt one of them standing over me as I collapsed, feeding on my fear and pain. They made my death worse than it had to be." Emma felt sick. How many of these angry spirits are there? The basement fell silent for a long moment. Then, on the main wall, letters formed slowly. "We think 4 or 5. They were here before the house was built. Probably died violently on this land many years ago. Every death in this house has made them stronger, and every family that's fled in terror has fed their power." The groaning sound came again, louder this time, and Emma felt a malevolent presence pressing against her consciousness. Her phone's battery, which had been at 90% when she came downstairs, now showed 23%. "They're draining my phone," she said aloud. "They drain everything," wrote another spirit, Michael, according to the signature that appeared. "Life force, electrical energy, warmth, hope. That's why families never stay long. The dark ones make living here unbearable." Emma's mind raced. But if you all left, found peace or moved on or whatever spirits do, wouldn't that weaken them? Take away their anchor to this place? Lily's writing appeared immediately. "That's what we hope, but we've been trapped here by our own unfinished business. I need to say goodbye to my family. Thomas needs people to know his death wasn't an accident. Sarah wants her children to know she loved them. We all have things keeping us here. And now you can help us," added Thomas's writing. "You can carry our messages to the living world. Help us complete what we couldn't finish ourselves." The malevolent presence pressed closer, and Emma heard what sounded like footsteps on the basement stairs. Slow, heavy, deliberate. But when she turned her flashlight toward the staircase, she saw nothing. "They're coming," wrote Lily urgently. "We have to end this for tonight. Meet us tomorrow night, but not here. The old gazebo foundation in the backyard. There used to be a structure there that was built after the Dark Ones were already bound to the house. It should be safer." Emma needed no further encouragement. She bolted for the stairs, taking them 2 at a time, her notebook clutched against her chest. Behind her, she heard a sound like breaking glass, though when she looked back, nothing appeared to be damaged. In her bedroom, door locked and lights blazing, Emma reviewed her notes from the evening. 7 spirits total: Lily, Thomas, Sarah, Michael, and 3 others who hadn't had time to introduce themselves properly. All of them trapped by unfinished business, all of them terrorized by older, more malevolent entities that fed on death and fear. She thought about Margaret Walsh's warning about the dangers of spirit communication and about the Millbrook Psychical Research Society meeting scheduled for Wednesday evening. She was clearly in over her head, dealing with forces she didn't understand and couldn't control alone. But as she drifted off to an uneasy sleep, Emma also thought about Lily's desperate gratitude, Thomas's need for justice, and Sarah's unspoken goodbye to her children. These weren't just ghosts or supernatural phenomena. They were people who had lived and loved and lost, who deserved peace and closure just as much in death as they had in life. Tomorrow, she would begin the work of helping them find that peace, and maybe in the process she would help herself understand why she alone had been given this frightening and wonderful gift. Wednesday evening found Emma standing nervously outside the Millbrook Unitarian Church, clutching a folder containing her growing collection of spirit communications and historical research. Margaret Walsh had arranged the introduction, but Emma still felt uncertain about revealing her experiences to strangers, even those who purportedly shared an interest in the paranormal. The church building was a modest white structure with tall windows and a simple bell tower, surrounded by ancient maple trees whose leaves glowed amber in the early evening light. As Emma approached the side entrance that Margaret had directed her to, she could see warm light spilling from the windows of what appeared to be a meeting room. Inside, she found a circle of folding chairs occupied by about a dozen people ranging in age from their 40s to their 70s. The atmosphere was more academic than mystical. No crystals or candles, just notebooks, recording devices, and the kind of serious attention she associated with university seminars. "You must be Emma," said a woman rising from one of the chairs. She was perhaps 60, with silver-streaked brown hair pulled back in a practical ponytail and intelligent brown eyes behind stylish glasses. "I'm Dr. Elizabeth Hartley. Margaret told me you might have some interesting experiences to share with us." Emma nodded, suddenly feeling very young among these accomplished adults. "Thank you for letting me come. I'm not sure if what I'm experiencing is real, or if I'm just having a psychological break from the stress of moving," Dr. Hartley finished with a gentle smile. "That's exactly the kind of healthy skepticism we encourage here. Please have a seat." As Emma settled into the circle, Dr. Hartley introduced the other members. There was Dr. James Morrison, a retired physics professor from the State University, Linda Santos, a former emergency room nurse, Robert Chen, a psychologist who specialized in trauma therapy, and several others whose credentials and life experiences suggested serious, rational people who had encountered something that challenged their understanding of reality. The Millbrook Psychical Research Society was founded 15 years ago, Dr. Hartley explained, after several of us had experiences that couldn't be easily dismissed or explained by conventional science. We approach paranormal phenomena with the same rigor we'd apply to any other research question: careful documentation, multiple witnesses when possible, and a commitment to ruling out natural explanations before considering supernatural ones. Emma felt some of her nervousness fade. These weren't the wild-eyed ghost hunters she'd expected, but thoughtful researchers who took the subject seriously. "Now," Dr. Hartley continued, "Margaret mentioned that you've been experiencing phenomena in the old Whitmore house. Would you be comfortable sharing some details with us?" Emma took a deep breath and opened her folder. Over the next 20 minutes, she described everything: the messages on mirrors and windows, her research into Lily Whitmore's death, the midnight conversations in the basement, and the disturbing presence of malevolent spirits that seemed to feed on fear and death. The group listened without interruption, occasionally taking notes, but never expressing skepticism or disbelief. When Emma finished, Dr. Hartley was quiet for a moment before responding. "Emma, what you're describing is consistent with phenomena we've documented in other locations around New England. Houses or properties where traumatic deaths have occurred sometimes seem to retain impressions of the people who died there. And yes, we've encountered cases where older, more aggressive spirits appear to trap newer ones." Dr. Morrison leaned forward. "From a physics perspective, what you're describing isn't necessarily impossible. Consciousness might be a form of energy that, under certain circumstances, could persist after biological death. The electromagnetic disturbances you've noticed, the draining of electronic devices, the temperature fluctuations, these suggest some kind of energy transfer or manipulation." Linda Santos nodded. "I've seen enough unexplained recoveries and inexplicable deaths in the ER to know that there are forces at work that medical science doesn't fully understand. If these spirits are asking for your help to find peace, there might be therapeutic value in attempting to provide it." Emma felt a surge of relief and validation. "So you don't think I'm crazy?" "Absolutely not," Dr. Hartley said firmly. "But we do think you're dealing with something potentially dangerous. These malevolent entities you've described sound like what we call shadow spirits, consciousnesses that have been corrupted by trauma, rage, or prolonged exposure to negative energy. They can be genuinely harmful to the living." Robert Chen, the trauma psychologist, spoke up. "Emma, have you told your parents about any of this?" Emma shook her head. "They wouldn't believe me, and honestly, I don't want to scare them or make them think there's something wrong with me." "That's understandable, but if you continue with this work, you may need their support eventually. These kinds of experiences can be emotionally and physically exhausting." "Doctor." Hartley stood and walked to a bookshelf, returning with a leather-bound journal. This belonged to a woman named Catherine Mills, who lived in Millbrook in the 1940s. She had experiences very similar to yours: communication with trapped spirits, messages on reflective surfaces, encounters with malevolent entities. Her journal documents her attempts to help the spirits find peace. Emma accepted the journal with trembling hands. "What happened to her?" "She succeeded eventually. The spirits she was helping did find peace and moved on. But the process took nearly 2 years, and it left her physically and emotionally drained. She moved away from Millbrook afterward and never spoke publicly about her experiences." Dr. Morrison added, "We've studied her journal extensively. She developed certain techniques for protecting herself during spirit communication, methods for distinguishing between benevolent and malevolent entities, and protocols for helping trapped souls resolve their unfinished business safely." Emma opened the journal and scanned a few pages. Catherine's handwriting was neat and precise, documenting conversations with spirits, research into their histories, and her own emotional responses to the work. It was like reading a manual for exactly what Emma was trying to do. "You'll let me borrow this?" "You can keep it," Dr. Hartley said, "but only if you agree to certain conditions. First, you check in with us regularly, at least twice a week, to report on your experiences and get guidance when needed. Second, you never attempt to communicate with the spirits alone. Always have someone who knows where you are and what you're doing. And third, if we determine at any point that you're in genuine danger, you stop immediately." Emma nodded eagerly. "Yes, absolutely. I accept all of those conditions." The meeting continued for another hour, with various members sharing their own experiences and offering practical advice. Emma learned about protective rituals, grounding techniques, and warning signs that indicated a spirit communication was becoming dangerous. By the time the group disbanded, she felt like she had found not just allies but mentors who could guide her safely through the challenging work ahead. As she walked home through the quiet streets of Millbrook, Catherine Mill's journal tucked securely in her backpack, Emma felt a mixture of excitement and trepidation. Tomorrow night, she would return to the spirits in her backyard, but this time she would be armed with knowledge, techniques, and the support of people who understood what she was attempting. For the first time since the messages had begun appearing, Emma felt like she might actually be able to help Lily and the others find the peace they'd been seeking for decades. The real work was about to begin. Armed with Catherine Mill's journal and the guidance of the Psychical Research Society, Emma spent Thursday preparing for what she hoped would be a breakthrough session with the trapped spirits. The journal detailed specific protection rituals and communication protocols that had proven effective in similar situations, and Emma practiced them carefully in her room before venturing outside at midnight. The foundation of the old gazebo was barely visible in her backyard, just a circular outline of weathered stones partially hidden by overgrown grass and fallen leaves. According to Catherine's notes, structures built after an initial haunting often provided neutral ground where spirits could communicate more freely, away from the influence of malevolent entities anchored to the original location. Emma had brought several items recommended by the journal: a small digital recorder, a notebook with pages numbered for easy reference, a thermos of hot tea to help maintain her body temperature during spirit contact, and a piece of iron jewelry, her grandmother's antique bracelet, which supposedly provided protection against hostile supernatural forces. As she settled onto the stone foundation, Emma felt the familiar drop in temperature that signaled spirit presence. But this time the cold felt different, cleaner somehow, less oppressive than it had in the basement. "Lily?" she called softly. "Are you here?" The response came not as condensation on a surface, but as a whisper in the autumn air, barely audible, but unmistakably present. "We're all here, Emma, and we're grateful you came back." Over the next hour, Emma experienced the most remarkable conversation of her life. The 7 spirits took turns speaking to her, their voices faint but clear in the cold night air. She learned their stories in detail, not just the circumstances of their deaths, but their lives, their dreams, their regrets, and the specific unfinished business that kept them bound to the earthly plane. Lily spoke of her parents' devastating grief and her need to let them know she was at peace. Thomas revealed that his death had been no accident. He discovered evidence of financial fraud by his landlord and had been murdered to keep him quiet. Sarah wanted her children to know about a hidden savings account she'd established for their education, money they'd never found after her death. Michael, who had died in 1991, had been a young father whose sudden heart attack had left critical medical information unshared with his family, information that could prevent similar deaths in his children. There was also Patricia from 1978, an elderly woman who had hidden important family documents before her death, and David from 1985, a Vietnam veteran whose undelivered letters to his war buddies contained messages of forgiveness and healing. The final spirit was the most recent, Jennifer Walsh, who had died in 2019 and was, Emma realized with shock, Margaret Walsh's granddaughter. Jennifer had been struggling with depression and had died by suicide in the house, leaving behind a letter of apology and love that her family had never found. "Margaret doesn't know you're here," Emma whispered, her heart breaking for the older woman who had lost her granddaughter so tragically. "She suspected," Jennifer's voice replied. "Why do you think she guided you to us?" She's been hoping for years that someone would come who could help us. Help me. The guilt is killing her, Emma. She thinks my death was her fault for not recognizing how much I was struggling. Emma documented everything in her notebook, including specific details that could be verified, locations of hidden items, names of people who could confirm the spirit's stories, and particular pieces of information that only the deceased would have known. According to Catherine's journal, this verification process was crucial for helping spirits achieve closure. As the night wore on, Emma also learned more about the malevolent entities that had terrorized the other spirits for decades. The shadow spirits, as Dr. Hartley had called them, were the remnants of violent deaths that had occurred on the land long before the house was built. They fed on fear, anger, and trauma, growing stronger with each death that occurred in their domain. "They've kept us trapped here," Lily explained, "by amplifying our negative emotions, our grief, our guilt, our anger about unfinished business. The stronger those feelings become, the more anchored we are to this place, and the more energy they can draw from us. But if we can complete our unfinished business," Thomas added, "if we can find peace and closure, we can break free from their influence. And without us as a power source, they'll weaken and eventually be forced to move on themselves." Emma understood now why her gift was so important. She wasn't just helping individual spirits find peace. She was potentially breaking a cycle of supernatural trauma that had plagued the property for generations. By 3 in the morning, Emma had filled nearly 20 pages with notes and recorded almost 2 hours of spirit voices. More importantly, she had developed a concrete plan for helping each spirit resolve their unfinished business. Some tasks would be relatively simple, delivering messages to living relatives or guiding people to hidden objects. Others would be more complex, requiring research, detective work, and possibly involving law enforcement in the case of Thomas's murder. "This is going to take time," Emma warned the spirits. "Some of these tasks might take weeks or months to complete." "We've waited decades," Lily replied. "We can wait a little longer knowing that our freedom is finally possible." As Emma prepared to return to the house, she felt a surge of malevolent energy from the direction of the building. The shadow spirits had sensed what was happening and were angry about her interference. The temperature dropped even further, and she heard what sounded like snarling in the distance. "They know what you're doing," Jennifer warned. "They'll try to stop you, try to scare you away like they've scared away all the others." Emma squared her shoulders, thinking of Catherine Mills and all she had accomplished despite similar threats. "Let them try. I'm not going anywhere until all of you are free." The grateful whispers of 7 spirits followed her back to the house, where she lay awake until dawn, planning the work that would begin tomorrow. She had found her purpose in Millbrook, and despite the dangers ahead, she had never felt more certain that she was exactly where she was meant to be. 3 months later, on a clear February morning, Emma stood once again in the foundation of the old gazebo, but this time she was not alone. Dr. Hartley, Margaret Walsh, and 2 other members of the Psychical Research Society had joined her for what they all hoped would be the final resolution session. The work had been exhausting, dangerous, and ultimately transformative. Emma had spent countless hours researching historical records, tracking down living relatives, and carefully delivering messages from the dead to the living. Each completed task had weakened the hold that unfinished business had on the spirits, and each freed soul had diminished the power of the shadow entities that had terrorized the house for generations. Thomas's murder had been the most challenging case to resolve. Working with Dr. Hartley and a sympathetic detective on the Millbrook police force, Emma had located evidence that confirmed Thomas's suspicions about his landlord's financial crimes. Though the murderer was long dead, the revelation had finally given Thomas the justice he'd sought for over 50 years. Sarah's hidden savings account had been found and distributed to her surviving children, who wept with gratitude when Emma delivered their mother's final message of love. Michael's medical information had prevented a genetic heart condition from claiming another life in his family. Patricia's hidden documents had resolved a decades-old inheritance dispute that had torn her family apart. David's letters to his war buddies had been the most emotionally challenging delivery Emma had made. 3 of the men were still alive, now in their 80s, and the messages of forgiveness and brotherhood that David had carried in death had healed wounds that had festered for 50 years. But it was Jennifer's case that had been the most personal and painful. Emma had found the suicide note that Jennifer's family had never discovered, a letter filled with love, apology, and explicit statements that her death was not their fault. Margaret Walsh had sobbed when Emma delivered her granddaughter's final words, and the healing process for the entire family had finally begun. One by one, over the course of those 3 months, the spirits had found peace and moved on. Emma had felt each departure as a lightening of the atmospheric pressure around the house, a gradual warming of the perpetually cold spaces, and a sense of liberation that grew stronger with each resolution. Only Lily remained. "I saved her for last," Emma explained to the gathered researchers, "because her case is different. The others had specific tasks that needed completion, but Lily's need is more fundamental. She needs to understand that grief, even devastating grief, is a natural part of love, and that her family's pain was a testament to how much they cared for her, not a burden she needs to carry." As they stood in the circle of stones, the familiar drop in temperature signaled Lily's presence. But this time, instead of whispered words in the air, Lily appeared, translucent and shimmering but unmistakably present. It was the first time Emma had actually seen one of the spirits, and the sight took her breath away. Lily looked exactly as she had in the old photographs, 15 years old with dark hair and bright, intelligent eyes, but there was a peace in her expression that transcended the tragedy of her death. "Emma," Lily said, her voice clear and strong, "you've given me the greatest gift possible. Through helping the others, you've shown me that death doesn't have to be the end of love or connection. My family grieved because they loved me, and their love didn't die when I did." Margaret Walsh stepped forward, tears streaming down her face. "Lily, I can see you. We can all see you." "Because I'm finally ready to be seen," Lily replied, "and because I'm finally ready to let go. Emma, you've taught me that holding on to grief, mine and theirs, doesn't honor love. Moving forward, finding peace, accepting that some things can't be changed, that's how we honor the love we shared." The air around them began to shimmer, and Emma felt a warmth she'd never experienced during spirit contact. It was the warmth of love transcending death, of peace finally achieved after decades of struggle. "Thank you," Lily said, looking directly at Emma. "Thank you for believing in us, for risking your own safety to help us find peace. You have a rare gift, Emma, and I hope you'll continue to use it to help others." As the words faded, so did Lily's form, dissolving into sparks of light that danced briefly in the winter air before disappearing entirely. The temperature returned to normal, and Emma felt the oppressive supernatural presence that had haunted the house lift completely. In the months that followed, Emma continued her work with the Psychical Research Society, helping other families in the region who were dealing with supernatural phenomena. Her parents, who had gradually become aware of their daughter's unusual gift, were initially skeptical but ultimately supportive, especially after witnessing the positive changes in their home and community. The old Victorian house on Maple Street became a place of warmth and peace, free from the supernatural turmoil that had plagued it for generations. Emma's parents decided to stay in Millbrook permanently, and Emma found herself looking forward to graduating high school in a town where she had discovered her true calling. Dr. Hartley often said that Emma possessed the rarest of gifts, the ability to serve as a bridge between the world of the living and the realm of the dead, helping both sides find the peace and closure they desperately needed. It was a responsibility Emma had learned to embrace, understanding that some people are called to ordinary lives, while others are called to extraordinary service. On quiet nights, when the old house settled peacefully around her family, Emma sometimes stood at her bedroom window and looked out at the gazebo foundation in the backyard. She never saw or heard from Lily and the others again, which she took as the ultimate confirmation that they had found the peace they sought. But she knew that somewhere, in whatever realm spirits inhabit after finding resolution, 7 souls were finally free, because one teenage girl had been brave enough to answer when they called for help. And that knowledge filled Emma with a sense of purpose and fulfillment that she knew would guide her for the rest of her life. The invisible world had revealed itself to her, and she had chosen to become its bridge to the light. Thank you so much for staying with us until the end. If you enjoyed this story and appreciate this kind of content, please subscribe to the channel so you won't miss upcoming videos and more fascinating stories. Until next time.